I can just make a couple of observations, I think, about the more broad, profound implications of what's transpiring at present. One, you remember in Watergate, John Dean was a lawyer. He said there's a cancer on the presidency. He finally decided, I'm not going to participate in the cover-up, in the obstruction of justice. John Dean is why the rule of law ultimately prevailed there. I mean, we discovered the White House tapes. Where's the John Dean in the White House or the Justice Department now? Where's the Elliot Richardson? Where's anybody who would stand up and say, I'm not doing this, Mr. President. My oath is to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. I'm not subordinate to you as an individual, because these are not close questions. These are flagrant violations. Not one individual. We even had someone in the White House, David Addington, saying, hey, let's hope that there's another bomb so we can get rid of FISA. That's the mentality. I hope there's another bombing so we can get rid of the statute. And nobody says anything whatsoever. The resignations are quiet. You go back and you write books at Harvard and, like, what's his name? He had a column today, I think, with in the Washington Post about Lend-Lease and Obama not using executive order to detain people. Jack Goldsmith, I guess is his name. But that's one thing. Why is no one doing anything? The other thing is you cannot cabin this to the lawlessness on torture. We haven't even discussed 5 years, thousands of felony violations of FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. That's not even discussed today, even though there are thousands of FISA violations. It's done with impunity. These are things. Jane Harman went on television after it was disclosed that we were spying on Americans on American soil. A law was enacted after the Church Committee exposure, when Jane was sitting there as the general counsel of the Senate Subcommittee on the Constitution, showing all the massive violations, opening mail, opening telegrams, spying on people for non-legitimate reasons because they protested the war. That statute said you need a warrant in order to spy on Americans on American soil for foreign intelligence purposes, and it was flouted with impunity for 5 years. And she defends it, says this is terrible. We should prosecute the New York Times, not the president. You know, she's head of the Intelligence Committee. And you find this, it migrates as well, not only in the national security area, and we've already mentioned there are 26 CIA operatives under indictment in Milan for participating in the kidnapping of Abu Omar, who was then sent to Egypt and tortured. 26, we're not extraditing them. 13, they're under arrest warrants in Germany for Mr. al-Masri's kidnapping and sending to Bagram. Nothing happens to them. It migrates. Lawlessness is infectious. Just 2 examples. When Henry Paulson was discussing what he was doing to bail out Bear Stearns, this is prior to the bailout legislation, TLDF, he said, well, what authority did he have to give this money to all the banking institutions in Wall Street? He said, well, I really didn't have anything, but I learned in Washington, D.C., if you lead, everybody will follow. He didn't have any authority. And most recently, the Chrysler and General Motors bailouts, you know the statute under which those billions were given? It limits bailout money to financial institutions which are defined. General Motors and Chrysler are not financial institutions. And when this case got into the court, the Justice Department said, well, sorry, there's no standing. It really doesn't matter whether they're car companies or not. There's no standing. We should be able to give them money because maybe if they folded, then a bank that had lent them money would go under, something like that. And it shows the lawlessness now that creeps over in far broader ways than simply the torture issue. And it's not, you cannot cabin it. It's the mentality there that explains why the culture of impunity prevails. And when we have a president of the United States, I was just thinking about President Nixon and the My Lai massacre. Could you imagine President Nixon saying, we have to cover up the My Lai massacre because we shot all those women and children in the ditch and we can't disclose it because it'll make people angry? Say, wait a minute, you prosecute Lieutenant Calley for that. You don't cover it up. And this is President Obama saying, well, we have to cover this up. Because there was such terrible torture things we did, people will get angry about it. Now, that's why we prosecute it. You don't conceal that. That's what the Soviet Union would do. That's what China would do, not the United States of America. And this is the President of the United States. And he's the best we're going to get. He's Harvard Law School, Chicago law professor, and that kind of thing. It shows how debased the culture is. Just the last observation that goes to the Congress and all of us. There's Edmund Burke that said, all that's necessary for evil to triumph is for good men and women to do nothing. And that is what we've experienced here. The Congress of the United States was informed 40 times 40 times. And what's their answer? Jane Harmon and Nancy Pelosi, they said we couldn't tell anybody else. You know, like we're little sheep and vassals. They told us to shut up. You know? Well, why are we paying you your salary as members of Congress? And I remember, again, in my days in Watergate, there was a similar issue with the Pentagon Papers, and Senator Mike Gravel took those Pentagon Papers that had been leaked out. Nixon was saying, you publish them, we'll never have diplomatic relations again, all the things that proved false. And he read them into the congressional record with impunity. The Supreme Court said, you have a privilege as a member of Congress to disclose anything you want without fear of retaliation from the executive branch. And he did it. He did it. Where's anyone doing that at present? Oh, they're all frightened.
You think a Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech, and they can't even tell us that war crimes are being committed. I mean, that's how far freedom of speech has gone. Yes.
Yes. Margie Burns, Progressive Populist. Isn't there a risk going forward that an investigation in one branch or agency could be used as the pretext for, if there's more than one investigation going on, as the pretext for suppressing information or for not releasing information in another investigation or another branch or agency? I think we've seen that before. Sometimes when you've got the threat of prosecution in one place, you have to have offers of immunity in another, or you have information not being given out or not being released and so forth. And how can that be avoided going forward?
Well, I know. First off, the documents that we're filing, these bar complaints, don't have that problem. I mean, so we're not even stepping into that potential mess. But that's a problem that can be resolved. I mean, if we want to go forward with a real investigation and real prosecution, you can have very limited immunity that will allow that to occur. So it depends on how the government wants to play it. Do you want to say something about that, Bruce?
In fact, precisely that issue arose in Watergate. You had the Ervin Commission.
Right.
You had Archibald Cox and then Leon Jaworski. You had the impeachment committee. They're all working at the same time. They didn't run interference with each other. If you want to shield your information from a claim of taint, you pack it with the court, like Archibald Cox did. Here's the information we got before the individual testified. It can't be tainted. There weren't any prosecution problems whatsoever as long as there was sensible coordination. So,
and in fact, these can all be synergistic more than blocking each other.
I've got a quick one here.
Go ahead.
There have been proposals for truth and reconciliation commissions as an alternative to prosecution, sort of modeled on the South African post-apartheid model. And I'll just note, setting aside the issue that would actually fail to meet our international commitments, like that embedded in the Convention Against Torture that Bruce referenced, it would entail the grants of immunity that you're talking about. Whether or not we ultimately pursue that option as a society really turns on the extent to which we as a polity demonstrate our backbone. Right? Whether or not there are independent checks asserted on the collusion, quite frankly, between the executive and Congress to create this set of affairs. That's whether or not we the people stand up. It's whether or not the press talks about it. It's whether or not the fourth branches, if you will, of our government are visible, quite frankly.
Other questions? Do you want to pass that?
The idea of going ahead with criminal prosecutions. Anyone can request that the FBI investigate, and anyone can go and actually swear out a warrant before a civil magistrate or a state, a federal magistrate judge, or any judge essentially supposedly will take a warrant from a citizen. It doesn't have to be the FBI or anyone. And these are usually unsuccessful because the FBI won't investigate it, whatever. But it seems like to me it's an urgency here because of the current state of the wars going on. People are losing their lives. And the economy is just really tanking. So the idea of any kind of way of going about a criminal prosecution.
Any comments on that?
Well, the Supreme Court has been rather clear that the executive branch has unreviewable discretion whether to initiate a criminal prosecution or not. So you're not going to get anywhere in court. Unfortunately, these were the cases that initiated when the civil rights movement in the South was under attack and you were having white racist grand juries trying to insist on prosecutions that the U.S. attorney wouldn't undertake. And the court said, no, you can't force the U.S. attorney to move forward. But those precedents still are valid law. So you can make complaints. That's what you do when you go over to Eric Holder or punish the president. Why aren't you initiating the prosecution? But the courts are not going to be any assistance whatsoever on this matter.